Here's a portion of a recent program on American History TV.
The Constitution also permitted the president, with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, which, as we discussed, meant that there was this expectation that the Senate would serve as a council of foreign affairs. And we talked about how Washington was present for every session, had heard these expectations, and fully intended to comply with them once he was actually in office. So accordingly, in the summer of 1789, he was getting ready to send advisors to a peace commission with Native American nations between the Creek and Cherokee nations, as well as North Carolina and South Carolina. There had been a lot of conflict on the western border, and they needed to try and come up with a peaceful solution because the Creek and Cherokee nations were defending their homeland against white incursion, and yet the states also wanted defense measures such that they wouldn't have violence as well. Washington had never done this kind of thing before, and so he wanted to ask the Senate's advice on how he should craft the instructions, what he should tell these representatives, what that should look like, and he wanted the Senate's input. So first he met with a committee to figure out all of the details that really hadn't been sorted before, like where he would sit when he came in the chamber, where John Adams, who is the president of the Senate, would sit when Washington was present, how he would be introduced, when they would talk, what he would bring. Details that maybe don't seem all that important or seem like they're kind of small and silly until you have to make all of those decisions for the first time all at once, and they really start to add up to feel quite overwhelming. He also sent all of the existing treaties so that the Senate could review them and understand what the relationships looked like. He brought with him Henry Knox, who was the acting Secretary of War, who had overseen those treaties so that Knox could, answer any questions, kind of provide any additional information, not unlike today, like we have when we have hearings where experts come and senators or congressmen can ask questions of those people. And on the day of his appointment, which was in August of 1782, he brought with him an address and a list of questions. And the address sort of summarized what the challenge was. He had told them ahead of time when he was coming, so the visit was not a surprise. He summarized the challenges, and then he had a list of questions that he hoped would spur debate, would spur conversation, would sort of prompt the discussion. And so the address was read, the questions were read, and he waited. And he was met with silence. Some of the senators sort of, shuffled papers to look busy, others twiddled their thumbs. All strategies I'm sure you have seen students use to avoid being called on. Some avoided eye contact, all of the things. And eventually one senator stood up and said, this is a new subject for us. It was not, he had warned them, but they said, this is a new subject for us. Can you please come back next week and we will give you our recommendation then? Washington absolutely lost his temper, stood up and yelled, "This defeats every purpose of my being here," except much bigger, taller, louder, scarier, because this was the most famous man in the world, and he was quite furious with them. And his temper was apparently quite a sight to behold when he lost it. He did calm down, and he agreed to come back a week later, but on his way out, he reportedly said that he would never again return for advice. And he never returned for advice. And no president since has ever returned for advice. So just 4 months into his presidency, this key element that was set up by the Constitution to provide the support and the backing for foreign policy for the president, Washington had determined didn't work because the Senate was annoying and inefficient and didn't get things done. Sometimes I don't think I blame him on that. And instead, he needed something that was more responsive, that when there was a real crisis, when foreign policy demanded immediate answers, then he could turn to that person and get the feedback he needed right away.
That was a portion of a recent American History TV program. You can watch the full program and all of our history programs anytime online at cspan.org/history.